The laughter came before the bell, and that alone was already a concrete threat. When someone laughs, they believe the outcome is decided, and in that instant, Mike Tyson realized he wasn't fighting just one man, but a collective certainty. The risk wasn't being knocked out, it was being reduced to a public misjudgment. His eyes stayed fixed while an invisible question spread through the gym. What happens if the kid fails? The opponent moved with excessive confidence, like someone already writing his own victory, and the crowd reinforced that narrative with loose comments and scattered laughs. Tyson felt the weight of misplaced expectation, knowing that any reckless gesture would confirm the contempt. The bell approached like a moral boundary, and no one there understood that those opening seconds would decide far more than a fight. The gym felt too stable, and that false security hid something about to collapse. Harsh lights carved the ring like a courtroom stage, while the crowd murmured with the confidence of those who believe they understand everything before the first punch. The danger wasn't in the noise, but in the invisible order holding the place together, age as authority, reputation as armor. The question creeping in was simple and cruel. What if that logic was wrong? Tyson felt the environment trying to push him into a smaller role, expecting him to accept the place chosen for him. The opponent circled loosely, almost showing off, as if the entire space worked in his favor. Each laugh reinforced the silent threat. Anyone who failed to confirm expectations would be crushed by them, and the ring seemed ready to collect that price. Nothing in that space looked dangerous at first glance, and that was exactly why the risk was greater. The crowd settled into its own certainty, as if the fight were just a bureaucratic detail before celebration. Tyson noticed the small signs of collapse no one else saw: quick glances seeking approval, laughs a little too loud, gestures a little too broad. The lingering question was uncomfortable. What happens when a system trusts itself too much? The smell of old sweat and leather mixed with the hot air created a sense of repetition, as if everything had already happened before. But Tyson knew that night would not follow the expected script. Every second increased the tension, because the more comfortable the environment felt, the more violent reality's correction would be when it finally asserted itself. The ring, isolated by light, functioned as a symbolic trap. Anyone who stepped inside carried not only their body, but the identity others projected onto them. The opponent seemed nourished by that, feeding on the automatic respect he received without having to prove anything. The real threat was invisible. If Tyson made a mistake, he wouldn't just lose the fight. He'd lose the right to be taken seriously in that world. The crowd watched like an informal tribunal, ready to confirm its initial verdict. The question was now unavoidable. Was anyone there prepared to see that structure break? Tyson kept a low, silent posture as the atmosphere thickened. Each contained breath suggested that the space was not ready for what was about to happen, and that the first blow could strike far more than a body. Mike Tyson felt the weight of the collective gaze as a constant provocation, and that was exactly the test. There were no direct insults, only the silent doubt about his presence there. The question pressing him didn't come from the opponent, but from the environment. Would he be swallowed or remain whole? Every muscle in his body was ready, but his mind had to stay still. Tyson knew that any excess, too much force, too much haste, would be read as immaturity. The real risk was losing emotional control before physical control. While the crowd analyzed his age, he mentally reviewed every training session, every harsh correction, every mistake repeated until it disappeared. Inner silence was his only protection. Still, something threatened to break that calm: the collective expectation of his failure and the temptation to prove them wrong too soon. The antagonist, on the other hand, appeared comfortable under pressure, and that hid his fragility. He smiled, talked, sought eye contact with the crowd, like someone who needed to be seen to fully exist. The question circling him, unnoticed, was dangerous. What if the respect he receives isn't enough today? His body was loose, almost negligent, trusting old patterns that had always worked. That excessive confidence created small openings, imperceptible to anyone who had never been punished for them. Tyson observed everything in silence, feeling the contrast between the other man's need for validation and his own refusal to react. The tension grew because that man believed he already dominated the situation, unaware that his identity depended too much on external response, and that this dependency could be exploited at any second. Between them, the ring seemed to shrink by the moment. The pressure didn't come from punches, but from what each represented there. Tyson carried the risk of being reduced to a failed promise, while the opponent risked something he had never considered losing: authority. The question now was who would recognize the real danger first. The crowd, oblivious, continued treating the fight as confirmation of an old hierarchy, unaware that this belief was becoming dead weight. Tyson kept his body low, eyes locked, as if waiting for a signal only he could recognize. The antagonist moved with too much freedom, and that difference in posture created an almost physical tension in the air. Something was about to change, and neither of them could turn back when it did. The moment the bell approaches transforms everything into public exposure. There's no room left to retreat without cost, and Mike Tyson feels that every second standing still amplifies the surrounding judgment. The question is now simple and cruel. Who will sustain their identity when expectation demands confirmation? The opponent crosses the center of the ring with wide steps, offering presence before offering real danger. The crowd reacts to the gesture as if it were already victory, and that premature applause creates an invisible trap. Tyson realizes that any hesitation will be read as fear, but any premature explosion will be read as lack of control. The risk tightens like a noose. Acting too early or too late would mean losing something essential. The bell seems to delay on purpose, stretching the tension until there is no clean exit. When the metallic sound finally cuts through the air, the ring stops being space and becomes sentence. Tyson advances just enough to test the reaction, and that alone shifts the opponent's emotional balance. The question that emerges is uncomfortable. Why isn't the kid nervous? The antagonist responds with excess, throwing wide, almost didactic movements, as if trying to teach a public lesson. Every gesture carries the need to prove something to others, not to himself. Tyson watches, absorbs, steps back half a pace, and that half step creates doubt where certainty once lived. The crowd senses the shift without understanding it, and silence begins to seep between murmurs. The fight hasn't exploded yet, but the hierarchy is already starting to creak under the weight of its own arrogance. The tension becomes physical when the antagonist tries to impose rhythm, accelerating unnecessarily. He believes speed and presence will resolve everything quickly, and that belief creates predictability. The question now shifts. Who is really controlling time here? Tyson keeps a compact guard, breathing almost imperceptibly, as if chaos can't reach him. Every attack that cuts through empty air reinforces a dangerous feeling in the opponent, the sense of being studied. The crowd feels it before understanding it, reacting with growing unease. The risk stops being just losing the fight and becomes losing emotional dominance in front of everyone. Tyson still doesn't respond, and that refusal to react creates more pressure than any punch could. The conflict tightens when the opponent smiles again, trying to reassert confidence, but the gesture already feels forced. Tyson notices the fracture and understands that the point of no return is near. The final question of this moment is devastating. What happens when someone realizes they underestimated the wrong person at the wrong moment? The ring feels smaller, the air heavier, and every step now carries consequence. The crowd holds its breath without realizing it, sensing that something is about to happen, but not knowing what. Tyson subtly adjusts his foot position, a minimal detail almost no one notices. That adjustment, however, signals that restraint is about to end, and that the coming silence will not be accidental. The false calm that settles in is more dangerous than chaos. The opponent slows for an instant, believing he's understood the pattern, and that brief adjustment creates the illusion of control. The question that imposes itself is treacherous. What if now it's just a matter of time? The crowd interprets the pause as mature strategy, confirming the narrative it wants to preserve. Tyson feels the risk grow because the other man's complacency opens space for more serious errors. Every second without direct response increases the antagonist's misplaced confidence, and that confidence pressures the entire environment to pick a side. Tyson keeps his breathing short, knowing the smallest sign of anxiety would give everything away. The danger isn't the next punch, but the collective belief that nothing decisive can happen suddenly. The antagonist tries to impose physical conversation, shoulder bumps, glove taps, attempts to provoke a reaction. The question changes shape. Will Tyson take the bait? The crowd leans forward, waiting for the young fighter to lose composure. This seemingly harmless contact carries a psychological threat. Break focus, force emotional response. Tyson accepts the contact without reacting, and that neutrality creates immediate discomfort. The opponent feels something doesn't fit, but can't identify what. The trap closes because the more he provokes, the more he exposes his need for control. Tyson's silence begins to sound like a challenge, and tension thickens when the antagonist realizes he's fighting not aggression, but the absence of it. The audience starts to divide internally, and that division creates noise. Some still laugh, others watch in silence, trying to recalibrate what they're seeing. The collective question emerges. Why isn't anything happening the way it should? The antagonist accelerates again, trying to reclaim protagonism through volume and presence. Every punch thrown without precision increases urgency, because now he needs to prove something quickly. Tyson retreats only as much as necessary, as if pulling an invisible rope. The risk intensifies because the distance between control and desperation shrinks with every second. The crowd senses something is being set up, but doesn't know by whom. That uncertainty creates a vacuum of expectation about to be filled violently. When the antagonist finally commits to advancing, the trap completes itself. He believes pressure resolves doubt, and that decision carries the weight of the point of no return. The final question of this moment is brutal. What happens when someone mistakes initiative for dominance? Tyson recognizes the opening not as opportunity, but as inevitable consequence. His feet adjust again, his torso relaxes, and the world seems to slow. The crowd doesn't understand yet, but feels the shift in the air, like before an unavoidable impact. The opponent comes in with too much conviction, and that conviction blinds him to the error. The next instant promises to rupture not just the fight, but the entire logic that sustained that confrontation. The first second after the bell doesn't explode, it compresses. Tyson advances without haste, and that absence of urgency creates invisible danger. The unspoken question is almost too simple to be comfortable. Why isn't he rushing? The opponent reads this as hesitation and decides to claim space with authority, taking a step that's just a little too wide. In that micro-error, something shifts. Tyson tilts his body not to escape, but to align. His breathing remains short and controlled, while his eyes calculate angles the other man was never trained to see. The crowd still expects noise, impact, obvious violence. What it doesn't realize is that the decision has already been made, and that the outcome now depends only on execution. The silence grows because the next movement doesn't ask permission, it simply happens. The following second doesn't look like an attack, it looks like correction. Tyson steps in half a pace, rotates his torso with surgical precision, and delivers a short, dry punch where the opponent believed he was protected. The question arrives too late. How did that get through the guard? The impact isn't flashy, but it is total. The antagonist's body reacts before his mind, folding slightly, breaking the rhythm that supported his confidence. Tyson doesn't celebrate, doesn't follow with excess. He's already repositioned, as if anticipating the next reaction. The crowd releases a confused sound, unable to categorize what it just saw. It wasn't luck. It wasn't brute force. It was timing. And that partial recognition creates immediate discomfort, because it suggests what comes next could be even more definitive. In the third second, inevitability reveals itself. The opponent tries to respond, but command no longer comes clean. Tyson notices the minimal hesitation and turns it into the final opening. Another short punch lands without warning, interrupting any attempt at recovery. The question is no longer what will happen, but how did this end so fast? The antagonist's body yields, not in dramatic collapse, but in functional failure. The ring falls silent in an unnatural way, as if sound has been drained from the space. Tyson steps back immediately, posture intact, breathing steady. There's no victory gesture, because the goal was never to prove something to others. The collective shock is born precisely from that restraint, and the silence confirms that something irreversible has just been exposed. The silence after impact brings no relief. It brings confusion. The opponent remains standing for a moment, and that is the most disturbing part. The question piercing him isn't whether he lost, but what exactly he just lost. His body responds with delay, knees weakening slightly, while his mind tries to reorganize a reality it no longer recognizes. He looks at Tyson expecting hostility, provocation, or confirmation of superiority. He finds none. That absence creates an uncomfortable void, because there is no clear enemy to hate. The crowd watches in contained shock, sensing that something essential has shifted, even without understanding how. The antagonist feels authority slipping away without noise, like sand through fingers, and realizes too late that his identity rested on something too fragile to withstand pressure. As the referee moves in, the antagonist tries to recover posture, but something internal has already given way. The question is now intimate and painful. When did I stop learning? He realizes he reacted by reflex, not by choice, and that realization hurts more than the punch. Old training sessions, past victories, begin to feel distant, almost irrelevant. Tyson remains still, awaiting instruction, and that calm deepens the crisis. There is no visible triumph to revolt against. The crowd, once complicit, now watches with silent respect, and that shift magnifies the discomfort. The antagonist understands he wasn't exposed as physically weak, but as someone who confused experience with depth. That realization can't be ignored, and the damage doesn't end in the ring. When the referee confirms the end, the antagonist feels the true weight of the moment. The question haunting him is unavoidable. Who am I without the certainty of superiority? He wasn't humiliated, and that makes everything harder. There's no easy excuse, no directed anger, only an unexpected mirror. Tyson walks away without looking back, and that final gesture seals the rupture. The opponent realizes he's lost something he can't quite name, but that has supported his decisions for years. The crowd begins to react, still restrained, like people who witnessed something they can't undo. The ring, now silent, makes it clear that the fight ended seconds ago, but the psychological consequence has only just begun.